I'll tell you why the NFC South might have the Super Bowl champion and why the Bucs is not going to be passed off from Baker Mayfield. We'll talk about that today here on Locked On NFL.
The barbershop is open and Tony Wiggins has a chair for you. He's ready with some real NFL talk. The local experts of Locked On bring their expertise, and Wiggy is ready with his clippers and shears. Sit down and enjoy. The new Locked On NFL starts now. Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
That is a fact. It is your team every day here on Locked On NFL. We thank you for making us your first listen. I am Tony Wiggins, the host of the Locked On NFL Barbershop Afternoon Show, and I'm here as usual on Mondays with my man Julian Council from Locked On Panthers. He is going to help me sort through some of the stories from around the National Football League, ones that we create just to get you ready for a training camp. Remember, wherever you get your podcast, make sure you check into that location so you do not miss an episode. That's whether you watch or listen. You don't want to miss today's episode either because it's brought to you by Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. I'll tell you what the last thing we're going to talk about, and then I'll end it with the first thing we're going to talk about, and we'll start right there, all right? Hype and hope in the NFC South. I will explain that about two players. Fields of Dreams in New York. Well, they're dreaming of quarterback play. We'll discuss that. But we're going to start. Does the Bucs stop in Tampa? I say it just very well might. And the reason why I say that is because I like the way their team is built. Even though I think every team in that division is going to be improved, it may not show up in the records department. And I don't forget that they beat both Philly and Detroit. And those were two teams that everyone thought were the teams to beat, and then lost the game against Washington. A lot of people in Tampa says they should have won, but David Harris from Locked On Commander said, "Nah, we drained the clock on them." That's another argument for another day. Julian, give me your feeling about the Bucs that are in the division that you cover.
Well, it feels like every time I'm up here, we talk about Tampa Bay because I feel like you're big on the Bucs this upcoming season. I do think this is their division to lose. You look at the last couple of years, they've been the only organization to have any sort of stability at quarterback, whether it was Tom Brady those last couple of years under Bruce Arians, or if it was Baker Mayfield the last couple of years, who has played at a pretty high level, the best he's played since he had that one season in Cleveland, away to the AFC divisional round and almost to the championship game that season. Like, I look at what they have with Baker, and we got Mike Evans and Chris Godwin coming back from injury, some of the young receiving talent, some of those players like Bucky Irving in the backfield who can also be a really good pass catcher and a nice weapon offensive line-wise. They have one of the best tackles in the game in Tristan Wirfs. Like, there's not a ton to be concerned about offensively. Defensively, I mean, pass rush, as long as Hassan Reddick is who he was prior to the fiasco of being traded to the Jets and saying, I don't want to play, and that secondary is stout, like, the only questions they're going to really have are at linebacker and really like at what their true ceiling level is. So I do think they should win the NFC South. I'm not so sure if I'm believing that they're going to be like a legitimate Super Bowl contender out of the NFC.
All right, so let's hear one of the reasons I did this, because I heard my man James Yako from Locked On Bucs talking about where some of the guys on that team rank. And they got a lot of people, man, that are really in that top tier at their positions. And then we'll come back and I'll tell you the hiccup that I think a lot of people have when it comes to the Bucs. Check this out.
Tell Mike Evans that there are a dozen receivers better than him. Tell Baker Mayfield that he's not as good as Justin freaking Herbert. Tell Godwin, tell Vita, tell Levante that there are all these players in the league better than them. Fuel that fire, because they love when stuff like this comes out. They love when they're counted out and disrespected in this fashion. They're just going to prove you wrong like they have everyone else over the course of the last 2 years.
All right, so I got a buddy of mine that I didn't run the subject matter by him, but I did want to get a feel. He's a Bucs fan. I wanted to get a feel for how he felt. He said, Wig, I think they're going to be very good, but it doesn't matter because I'm not a big fan of Todd Bowles. A lot of people are fans of Todd Bowles, the person, but they're not fans of Todd Bowles, the coach.
Interesting. I mean, you look at it, whenever Todd Bowles, even back in New York with the Jets, had a good quarterback, or at least good quarterback play, he had capable teams. And he only had one season where Ryan Fitzpatrick was really good for them. They had that win in overtime against Tom Brady and the Patriots in like week 16. And then the next week, Fitzpatrick all but soiled himself in the snow in Buffalo. And that cost him a chance to go to the playoffs as Pittsburgh went instead of them. So, and you look at the last couple of years, like with Baker, who's played really well, whether it was last year under Liam Cohen as the OC, then the year prior with Dave Canales, who's now in Carolina as the OC. Like, we have seen the best of Baker. I understand, like, there still seems to be like kind of this like hesitance to believe in Todd Bowles as the head coach, but when you're out there winning division after division, which he's done so far, and clearly the players buy into what he's doing, he's hiring the right people. That's such a big thing. Think about it. Like, you had to hire Dave Canales after it didn't work out there. And then you brought in Liam Cohen after Dave left. Now Cohen has left and you have elevated who was underneath Liam Cohen. Like, that is such an important part of this job that I don't think people really recognize, understand. That's like the part of, oh, you don't want to hire a defensive head coach because you're always going to be replacing your offensive coordinator, but they can find the right guys. Like Dan Campbell. Does anyone think like Dan Campbell necessarily is like this head coaching, like genius football guru? And don't get me wrong. Like, obviously he knows the game far more than all of us know for the most part. But like, he's hired really good people. Aaron Glenn, and he's gone on to be head coach now. He hired Ben Johnson, who was like the wonder kid the last couple of years, who finally left to go to Chicago. And then we'll see what his new hire is able to do. And then you've seen what Jared Goff was able to do the last couple of years, just what that organization's become. So I don't know, man. Like, I get that he's not like this sexy young guy that everybody wants as far as these offensive geniuses. And we have seen plenty of those guys not pan out, but he's sticking around and winning games and winning divisions. So we'll see. But I think at this point in time, maybe put some respect on Todd Bowles' name out there.
I think you got to put respect on it. And, for me, Tampa's had some taste of winning, right? They did it. They were winning games with Dungy, and then they won with John Gruden, and then they had this little lull, and then they were winning games with Bruce Arians, even with Jameis throwing interceptions and touchdowns at the same rate.
30.
And then they got Tom Brady, and then they had another taste of winning a championship and hovering around a championship for the years that Brady was there. I just think people get a little spoiled, and they do this with Mike Tomlin too, man. It's like, once you've had a taste of winning, then everything becomes win or bust, especially when you feel like you're entitled to be there. And if it doesn't happen, they start criticizing the coach all the time. Meanwhile, Kyle Shanahan he's missed the 4 playoffs in 8 years, but everybody looks at him like a wonder kid, and they keep hiring all of his assistant coaches. At some point, we have to kind of even this thing out and balance it out from our perspective, and not worry so much about the fans. You mentioned the Lions. I'm going to get to them in a second, but I'm going to get to Aaron Glenn's team in New York here at the top of the next segment. And there's some optimism. It's funny how I always say it's a combination between coach and quarterback that really, really matters. Well, this coach is dependent on a quarterback that's at his third stop. We'll discuss that and more here in just a second on Locked On NFL. All right, today's show is sponsored and brought to you by Gametime. Have you ever decided at the last minute that you wanted to head to a ball game with friends or family? Maybe it's game day and you suddenly realize you want to be in the stands. That's exactly where Gametime comes in. It's the easiest way to grab last-minute tickets without the stress. With the money you save on tickets, you can splurge on food, drinks, merch, and even invite a bigger group to come with you. Gametime definitely makes that possible. Gametime makes buying tickets fast and simple. Prices on the app actually drop the closer you get to the first pitch, and they've got incredible last-minute deals, clear seat views, and the lowest price guarantee that takes the worry out of buying. Here's what you want to do, man. Those seat views are very important to you. You get a chance to see your seat right on the app before you buy, so you know exactly where you'll be. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime and download the Gametime app. Create an account and use the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download the Gametime app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Moving and grooving here on Locked On NFL with my man Julian Council of Locked On Panthers. We'll get to him in a minute. I got a player I feel good about, and I want him to explain all of that to us. First, we're going to make a little bit of a pit stop before we talk about the Lions, who want to contend or continue to contend and kind of hold off those Bucs. They lost coach. They lost coaches, in fact, with plural. One of them ended up in New York, but he also ended up with a quarterback that, in my opinion, has a whole lot to prove. I think he has a lot of blue sky to prove it. Let's hear from John Lee Butchko up with Locked On Jets about Justin Fields.
So is it unrealistic to expect Fields to be this year's Darnold? Well, it's a good question. And what I would say is I don't think the stats are going to be at the same level, even if Fields has success. When I say the Jets are hoping Justin Fields has a Sam Darnold in Minnesota type season, I mean, the hope is that his level of play improves. Sam Darnold last year had a tremendous statistical season. I don't think that's going to happen this year with Justin Fields.
Okay, so it'd be easy for me to say, well, Sam Darnold had a Baker Mayfield resurgence, and the common denominator between both of them is they went to two real organizations with great structure. Mm-hmm. Well, Justin Fields went to Pittsburgh, and they were in need of a quarterback, and they let a young 24-year-old former top 5 pick just leave and go sign with the Jets. Do you feel good about the prospects of Justin Fields?
Well, no, because he's going to New York Jets, so there's no chance. Well, let's see how it works out. The Darnold comparison is interesting because I'm certainly no fan of Sam Darnold. I've never been a believer in Sam Darnold, even when he went to the Jets to begin with the situation. I know it didn't work out there. It did not work out in Carolina. He was able to bounce back last year, and I thought it was a very nice story. And then in the end, we saw that, he's still Sam Darnold. So I look at it I don't know much about this new Jets offensive coordinator, Tanner Engstrand, who is coming over from Detroit with Aaron Glenn. He was the passing game coordinator. So if things do work out with him and Justin Fields, he'll be the next young, hot name who's got to be a head coach, even though there may be really not that many qualities. I'd suggest he actually could be a good head coach, but that doesn't really matter in today's NFL when owners are looking at who they want to be the leaders of their organization. But it's going to really hinge upon how good of a play caller he is and how good of a communicator he is and what kind of relationship that he and Justin are able to have. Because if you look at just Detroit, there's kind of similarities with Jared Goff, who had done a lot more, honestly. He had gone to the playoffs multiple times, had gone to the Super Bowl, but people were pretty down and out on him and thought that the Lions would have him from a season and then they would go and draft somebody high the following year. And I'm pretty sure that's probably the thought process for a lot of people with the Jets, that they're going to have Justin Fields for a season and then they're going to go get maybe Garrett Nussmeier out of LSU or Arch Manning if that works out down at Texas next season, that Justin won't be that guy. So maybe there'll be parallels in that way, or there could be a parallel where he actually plays really well and the Jets don't retain him, which wouldn't be similar to kind of what happened in Minnesota because they already had JJ McCarthy. We'll see. I'm hopeful that it works out for Justin because I've always been a fan. Hopeful it works out for Aaron Glenn. The problem just for me is it's the Jets, and maybe that's a lazy analysis, but come on, man. Look at the last 15 years of this organization and all the mistakes they've made time after time after time for quarterbacks who, you might have believed in Zach Wilson. The 1 year he had that was good in college, they were playing against nobody because of the pandemic. And then you look at Sam Darnold, turnover machine his last year at USC when they were hyping him up and say they're going to go to the playoff. I mean, the Sanchez, it's just we'll see. I'm not a believer in this working out, but I'm hopeful for all the people involved that it does, at least for them.
Yeah, I know. And I'm not angry at you for that, because one of the things is people always talk about, and I say it, I always often discuss the New England Patriots with the little man on the helmet hiking the ball. I say, I remember those helmets. I remember those uniforms. I remember that the things that they were known for was a terrible injury to an all-time great player for them and a snowplow coming on the field. And then things changed. And people think it's just Brady and Belichick, but it's not. It's Robert Kraft. So now that leads me to Woody Johnson. Woody Johnson fired a coach and toted him out the building the way Joe Clark did that kid in Lean on Me and in front of everybody. And it's if that part of it hasn't changed, because there's a lot of things that go on with ownership that you don't see that affects how people lead in the building. If that doesn't change, I don't think a whole lot else is going to change. We mentioned the Lions earlier, and the Bucs. The Bucs now are one of those teams in the NFC that have improved their wide receivers. They had 3 good ones last year. Now they just added another one, right? And they make a Buccaneers in the draft. One of the things I believe you're going to have to do is learn to keep up in passing game, even though all these teams are running. The Detroit Lions aren't just banking on getting healthy. They're banking on actually adding players, and that's exactly what they did. And guess what? They took one of them from the Jets. Listen to my man McDerry talk about their new addition.
The Lions do have a top 6 corner in the NFL, according to PFF, and that is DJ Reed, of course. The Lions upgraded in a big way because Carlton Davis, who was their best corner a year ago, and I would have loved to have seen back with Detroit, was ranked 18th on this list. And DJ Reed is 6th. That's a big upgrade for this team. And if DJ Reed can come in and be that guy that just goes up against the top receivers on the other team, and the Lions are going to be seeing a lot of good ones, that's a big time upgrade. And maybe a signing we don't talk enough about.
That's a sizable upgrade, but being the 18th best corner in the league is still pretty good when you consider most teams play 3 corners at one time. So if you go 3 times 32, that's 66. That's not bad. And we'll talk about the team that Carlton Davis is going to. But do you think adding DJ Reed and getting some of those healthy players back, including Aiden Hutchinson, is enough to maybe get Detroit to at least win one more game than they did 2 years ago?
Yeah, I mean, you look at their defense, like the standard didn't necessarily drop off from the effort and attention to detail that those guys played with last year. Is just that they caught up with them at the end of the day. And I do think in that playoff game, the turnovers from Jared Goff were probably the far more glaring issue that they had, more so than not being able to get out the field and stop Washington. I always look at PFF with a grain of salt because, like, covering the Panthers, J.C. Horn was one of the highest paid. He is one of the highest paid defensive backs in the history of the NFL right now. Right. And they had him ranked lower than Mike Jackson, who was playing opposite him last year. Yet J.C. was a Pro Bowler. So PFF, the numbers, I mean, it's a way to look at things. I certainly use it on my shows. But like, I think DJ Reed's a good player without needing to hear what the folks at Pro Football Focus have to say and where they grade him and rank him and all of that. And I do think that's going to be a key for Detroit as they do lose their DC and Aaron Glenn, who I sure would love to have DJ Reed still there in New York with him with the Jets. But I do think that just being healthier, that will have them back to playing to the standard that we had all become accustomed to when Aaron Glenn was their DC, and even moving forward with all the talent that they have there in Motown.
Yeah, numbers might tell a story, but they don't tell the whole truth. They don't lie, but they don't tell the whole truth. And we have our own top 100 list that Locked On NFL and on the Locked On Podcast Network that we'll reference to as we get closer and closer to the season, especially when training camp comes. There was a mention of Carlton Davis. Carlton Davis is going to join the New England Patriots. The Patriots have a lot of growing up to do. Some people think just by the addition of the better coaching staff that they could take some of that hard play and turn it into at least 7 or 8 wins. And it could go further than that if the offensive line plays better. Here's my man Nick Cattles from Locked On Patriots to tell you about that part of the team.
When lined up at guard over the past 3 seasons, Onwenu has generated a 77.9 pass blocking grade. That is the 5th highest mark among qualified guards over that span. He's been one of the best in pass protection. It's when he goes to tackle and his grade suffers a little bit that causes that wavering. But if we have Onwenu at right guard from day one, throughout camp, throughout the joint practices, we get to the season, week 1, Onwenu's out there at right guard, I think he's going to do a very, very good job because that's what he's done for the most part when he's been able to be comfortable with his situation and going out there and playing his natural position.
All right, so a lot of things have to happen for the Patriots to improve. They got to find some wide receivers. Drake May has to get better. Everybody has to adapt to the new system and all of the new bodies, but make no mistake about it, the offensive line, and you know this from being in Carolina, and I hope to say this at some point during this season for Jacksonville, when you put resources into that group, it might take a while, but eventually it'll get better.
Yeah, and you saw with the defensive line the amount of money that they spent, like on a guy like Milton Williams, who they won a bidding war for on that first day of the legal negotiating period, how Braves and everybody up there understands, like, yeah, we got to win up front to be able to win football games. And I mean, the guy that he played for and who coached there for 2 decades, Bill Belichick, obviously understood that as well. And I do like the point that Nick brings up there. Like, if Owenu can play guard, and they brought in Morgan Moses to play right tackle, and they brought in Garrett Bradbury, who I'm not the biggest fan of to play at center, but I do think the relationship that he and Drake could have could be really beneficial, as those are both Charlotte guys. Now, one went to State, Bradbury, one went to Carolina in May, but that could be a really nice connection for Drake to have a veteran center there for him. And then they draft Will Campbell, and that will be the real big test to see how that is able to play out. Like, I don't think that Moses or Bradbury or any of the top players at their respective positions, and of course Owenu, if they are good enough at tackle, they got a guy, Marcus Bryant, who they drafted out of Missouri, who could be the future that right tackle for them down the road, that could be a better unit than they were last year. They have to be. Like, last year, you look at ESPN's pass rush win rate, they were – or pass blocking win rate, by the way, they were 31st. Run blocking win rate, they were 32nd. Like, they couldn't help out Drake by protecting him. They could not help out Drake by being able to open up holes to run the football. And if that's the case, like, your quarterback doesn't have a chance. And, like, I don't love what they have at wide receiver right now. Like, they're going to have to get so much more out of what they got out of Jalen Polk last year, the second rounder from Washington. Yeah. Like, he was a complete disaster in my mind. I mean, Stephon Diggs coming off an ACL and the offseason mess. I'm not a huge fan of that move. Like, Mac Hollins, nice player in Buffalo, but okay, like, cool. There's a Carolina connection with him and Drake as well. But is that going to be the guy you're leaning on? So, like, Keyshawn Bootsy going to have to take a step forward. I look at the receivers. Kyle Williams, nice draft pick out of Washington State. They still got a lot of work to do in terms of getting Drake the necessary weaponry, but the offensive line should be better. But I don't know if that will be enough for them to really take this kind of step forward that I think a lot of Patriots fans are hoping they will take, and being close to being competitive, knowing that the Bills have now become what New England was for those 20-something years.
Yeah, a day 3 pick last year on Javon Baker, too, 1,000 yards receiver from UCF, and it was crickets. You didn't see or hear anything. So, yeah, a lot of guys at wide receiver have to play better. If you protect that young quarterback, you got a shot at doing it. I want to go to the NFC South, go back to the NFC South. Is Bijan Robinson hype, or is he really as good as we think? I'll let the resident expert of that division, Julian Council, let you know the answer to that question in just a second here on Locked On NFL. All right, hype and hope. I'm very, very hopeful about a player that plays for Julian's team. We'll get to him in just a second, but I'm just I did this with Kyle Pitts already, right? And I'm like, then the other wide receiver, the kid from USC, I'm like, okay, yeah, he really is that good, right? Drake London.
Correct, yeah.
I just don't know about Bijan. I watch him and I go, wow. But then when I wonder, they don't play enough of him and I don't see enough of him. And I'm like, what effect did he have on the game? It reminds me of an and one player in basketball. Man, he did some crossovers and he cooked guys and the crowd went crazy. He didn't even shoot the ball. The dude fell down and he just started dancing. You know, it's just like, it's all of the hype, but I just don't see the effect that a running back has on the game, like a Barkley, like a Derrick Henry. Well, listen to my man, Aaron Freeman from Locked On Falcons talk about him, and then I'll let I was about to say Ross. I'll let my man Julian Council give me his opinion.
So, you know, if someone ran up to me and claimed to be from the future and said, hey, Bijan Robinson leads the NFL in rushing this year, I would actually believe that person and not immediately call the cops and say there's a crazy person claiming to be from the future. And I would also get some other tips from that person based off of that information. And so I think if Bijan has that type of year, it's going to be instrumental to the Falcons' success this year. It's theoretically possible that you could see Bijan adding, you know, potentially 300 plus more yards to his total and pushing his rushing total to around 800 yards rushing.
What do you think? Can he actually lead? I'm just sitting there thinking about Jahmyr Gibbs, who's going to get a big load and who's going to get a bigger running load in Detroit. And then Saquon ain't going away, even though they're probably going to help him out a little bit with A.J. Dillon. Derrick Henry's still there. You can't say because Lamar Jackson's there, he ain't going to get his stats because he got him anyway last year. So could this be possible with Bijan?
Yeah, I would say there's only one running back in the league that has like a massive impact in their team winning games. That's Saquon Barkley. The rest of those guys, like, okay, Baltimore wins games because they have Lamar Jackson.
Okay.
And Derrick Henry, maybe back in Tennessee when he had Ryan Tannehill. That's why they were winning games. But when you're in Baltimore, no, it's because you have Lamar, who could have been MVP for a third time last season. What if I told you that Bijan Robinson was on a Hall of Fame track? Because I'm looking at this tweet that
I would absolutely believe you.
I'm looking at this tweet that the Falcons just put out there this morning, and they said the only players in NFL history to record 2,400 rushing yards and 100 receptions in their first two seasons are Edgerrin James, famously of the Indianapolis Colts, who is in the Pro Football Hall of Fame up there in Canton, and then LaDainian Tomlinson, who played most of his years, of course, in San Diego and then had to go play for the Jets at the end of his career. He's also has a bust in Canton. And then Bijan Robinson, 3 guys have done that.
Impressive.
So according to that stat that the Falcons put out there this morning on their own social media page, mind you, but it's a fact. Everything that Aaron was talking about and any belief anyone has in him becoming a top back, it at least is a founded belief just based off of those numbers compared to 2 guys who were some of the best we have ever seen literally in the history of this game at that running back position. So I'm a believer in him being a great player. I just know the Falcons love to run the football. Now their success as a team is going to be determined upon, can they stop anybody? And also, is Michael Penix Jr. going to be that guy? Cool. You can run the ball a ton. That's awesome. But unless you have the Eagles roster, you're probably not going to be winning at the highest of levels because they just don't really have a weakness at all in Philadelphia. And plenty of times you're going to look at the quarterback, Jalen Hurts, as being a weakness, which I kind of thought was ridiculous. But in a way, sometimes, okay, I can see where you're coming from. Atlanta doesn't have that kind of roster, so they're going to need the quarterback and the defense to be really good. But I do think that Bijan Robinson can absolutely be one of the top backs in the league. But I'd have a hard time believing he's ever going to have the impact that guys like Derrick Henry had in the past, and that who else? Chris McCaffrey, I'd even say, Saquon Barkley, just because I do think that the quarterback and other parts of that team are just going to be so more vital to their success than just him alone as a running back.
Yeah, so with him, it feels like, I'll use another basketball analogy. It's like the dude that averages 23 points a game in the NBA and nobody cares because his team is non-existent and irrelevant. That's what it feels like to me. It doesn't feel like it doesn't feel like he's headed to the Hall of Fame, man. It just feels like he's this dude for the Brooklyn Nets that cooks you for 35 points and nobody knows who he is for real. That's just the way it feels like. But we're rooting for him, and I probably have a little bit of hangover from Kyle Pitts because I was told that he was the next coming of Mark Bavaro and Ron Gronkowski, and I just haven't seen that yet. Now, Xavier Legette, there's a lot of reasons I like him. One reason, he was in the Glorilla video, and I love me some Glorilla, right? But I also just like country boys that's just like themselves all the time. That doesn't translate to wins on the field. But when you look at him, he's a physical specimen, and I think he works really, really hard. Tell us why am I more hopeful on Xavier Legette than some people might think I should be?
Oh, I'm certainly one of those. Like I didn't love the selection when the Panthers took him. And if you look at a lot of the guys that were, because they had, I think it was like 11, maybe 9. It was like the first 34 picks last year were wide receivers. And like they're the high end guys like Rome Odunze, Marvin Harrison Jr. And I
think Ladd went right before him. Then they let McConkey go right around.
McConkey went after him. And McConkey,
for real?
You make, like, I looked at the numbers and I could try to pull it up real quickly, but I had talked about this on my show. Like, what rookie receiver can you sit here and tell me Xavier Legette was better than last year? Like, he wasn't better than the top guys, which you should not expect, but he wasn't better than Xavier Worthy. He was drafted 28th overall, a couple spots ahead of him. I mean, Ricky Pearsall got shot, and I would argue that he was better than Xavier Legette was last year.
Yeah.
Coleman, up and down, but had better numbers. McConkey, way better. Like, Jalen Polk went 37th overall. It was terrible. Like, that's the only guy in that, like, those top 37 picks of the receivers who got taken.
Jalen McMillan doesn't help your cause. It doesn't. I mean, because he was a third round, and he ended up playing real well for Tampa.
Who?
Jalen McMillan.
McMillan, yeah. I mean, I think Legette can be a nice, like, number 2 for Carolina. And He had really bad problems with drops. Now he had like a wrist issue, had a foot injury that was a scare for them early on in training camp that apparently had some surgery on this offseason to get corrected. And he appears to be in good shape. And Canales said a lot of spoke highly of him as he is playing faster, which is, of course, what happens after you've been in the league for a year. But if I just look at like a guy who to bank on as being a dude for Carolina, it would be Tetairoa McMillan. Because you look at his numbers, compared to what Malik Neighbors did his final 2 years at LSU, what Rome Odunze did his final years at Washington, where he probably was the best receiver in college football, and what Marvin Harrison Jr. did in his final 2 years in Columbus at Ohio State, like that's the numbers that McMillan put up. And what they did last year is what I would expect for McMillan to do. Like last season, I did not have expectations for Legette, who was technically a first-round pick, but he was going in the second round. Carolina made that trade up a spot because of Dan Morgan's relationship with Brandon Beane, who he used to work for in Buffalo, and who Beane learned from Marty Herney here as a assistant general manager all those years in Carolina. So that allowed them to give up nothing to move up one spot. I'm not a huge believer in Legette being somebody who's going to be like a great receiver in the NFL. Like it's a fun story that he is a country boy, that they're taking him to the Kentucky Derby. Like he's really been turned into a cartoon character, which I think is good as far as like people liking him. But the on-field product, I don't think is ever going to be like that great.
Yeah, and that's a bad thing when you're like a caricature instead of people talking about your play on the field. I see his body type, and I go back to my comp in the draft, and he ended up in Carolina. I said he has a Mushin Muhammad body and a Mushin Muhammad physicality that if he does, they'll fall in love with him if he plays like that, and people start calling him Baby Moose. But I don't know. That's a little
the
bit.
Comparisons were always to, at least leading up to the draft for Panther fans, just because of who the staff they brought in was DK Metcalf.
Right.
And like you look at DK, it's not like DK produced a ton in college at Ole Miss. And like Legette did nothing until his final year there in Columbia, where he was outstanding. And I was just very curious, okay, for a guy who effectively did nothing for 4 years and did a ton his last year, like you don't get 5 years, even if he has fifth-year option, you don't get 4 years of no production to be able to then show in your final year a ton of production. Maybe Carolina would bet on him like they bet on J.C. Horn, who had been banged up, missed all that time. They still exercised a fifth-year option. But now that you got talent like Tetairoa McMillan, I mean, Jalen Coker was an undrafted free agent last year, and he outplayed Legette. And he's back in here. They brought in Hunter Renfrow. And if he is what he was last time he was healthy, which was his Pro Bowl year with the Raiders, like that's another mouth to feed. Adam Thielen's back in Carolina. So he's going to have to really separate himself to get the kind of receptions and targets that he wants this season and to justify the move Carolina made last year. But yeah, fun guy. Love talking to him. But like I'm still very skeptical if that is going to be a player that we talk about the on-field more than the off-field.
I got it. And that's what we want. And that's what you get here on Locked On NFL. If you want more, make sure you check out Julian on Locked On Panthers, and go to Locked On NFL Scouting. You can get this podcast wherever you get your podcast and make it your second listen, because Kyle Krabs and Joe Marino go through all of the rosters, all of the prospects, and they'll prime you up for training camp so you know exactly what your depth chart looks like. Make sure you check that out and make it your second listen. Julian Council, glad to have you back, man. We'll see you when we see you. We know how that goes, man. Enjoy your time up there in Carolina. Make sure you check out Julian, like I said, at Locked On Panthers. Until next time, you guys take care. We'll see you.